Armored Core 6 is a mecha game, meaning that instead of controlling a naked guy with a stick, your character will be sitting in a robot. Now, despite all my professional, let alone personal experience with sitting, I just don't relate to that. And so I must admit, I am not a huge fan of the genre. As a result, Armored Core didn't seem like the game for me, and the only reason I ended up playing it in the first place was not my interest in it, but rather in its developer. FromSoft is good, after all, and so are their games. But despite thoroughly enjoying them, usually I cannot fully immerse myself in their worlds, even though for many people that is one of the main draws of these games.
If I didn't know better, I'd think you had feelings for me.
And yet, here I was, checking which new simulations I can duel against in the arena, and realizing that I know those mechs. Well, I know their pilots. I talked with some of them before, went on missions with the others, and heard stories of the rest. One-dimensional as most of them are, I ended up liking them as characters. Hell of a lot more than most NPCs in other FromSoft titles. And that is considering that I don't even know what any single one of them looks like behind their machines. This was a shocking realization for me. Clearly, Armored Core 6 was doing something right, and I just had to find out what that was. What Armored Core 6 does better than other FromSoft titles. Armored Core 6 reminded me of some of my first experiences playing video games as a kid. Simple, old games without much narrative or depth. Standards were different back then, and space limitations played their part as well. But ironically, another result of it was that those games gave you space. Space for imagination, to fill in the gaps and add more details. And being a small kid, not knowing much about games at all, it just felt magical to let my imagination run wild. Honestly, I don't think whatever I thought up back then was any good, but to me, it was. And Armored Core 6 reminded me of those times. It had confidence in me to fill in the gaps on my own, imagine what the characters look like, what's their backstory, how they feel about the way the situation is unfolding, and so on. And seeing how the Armored Core subreddit was flooded with various fan art and speculations on different characters soon after release shows me that I'm not the only one who felt that way. You might think that Dark Souls would have a similar effect. It's very vague in its storytelling, making for a good canvas to paint over. But in my opinion, this is something that other FromSoft games don't do quite as well, despite actively trying. For me, the foundation that they provide is just too shaky. Some of the details in these games I could never truly believe in, because while they may be very thoughtful and deliberate in certain clever ways, there are also so many things that just don't make any sense, no matter how you look at them. And not only does that make my journey feel less meaningful, but it also plants doubt in other design choices of the game. What is intentionally made to be a certain way for storytelling or lore purposes, and what is a byproduct of an imperfect game that I should just shut up about and never question again? Souls fans pretend that this issue is only present in Dark Souls 2 and love to point out its inconsistencies, but if we're being totally honest, all FromSoft games are plagued by this. Why is there a merchant surrounded by hostile dogs at a dead end of a bridge guarded by a freaking dragon in the middle of nowhere? It would be the worst merchant ever to open shop in such an enticing location, if not for the fact that pretty much all of FromSoft merchants are just like that. But why? Why flying enemies don't just fly and instead decide to fall to their deaths? They had no trouble carrying my ass over here for some reason. How does Patches appear on the opposite side of the bridge while lowering it? Like, what kind of lore implication does that have? And what's up with him never even spawning there if I take a single step beyond this point? What kind of twisted logic do I have to use to explain the ridiculous quest triggers in these games? If you ever played any of them, you know that I can keep going with those examples, but this segment is long enough as it is. Of course, I don't expect games to be perfectly logical and have a way of explaining every little detail or inconsistency. No game is perfect, I get that, but Dark Souls games are built on vagueness, and although not always, but still more often than I'd like to admit, there is nothing behind it all. Armored Core 6 has similar problems too. I cannot imagine, for instance, what makes some of these machines stay in the air, so it might seem hypocritical of me to lash out at other games, but there are some subtle differences between them. First of all, Armored Core 6 has a more straightforward narrative, making for a solid groundwork or a less shaky foundation I was talking about. It also doesn't rely on me to analyze every little scratch on some enemy hidden behind 3 illusory walls, thus setting the right expectations for me on what is intentional and what isn't. It has easy to understand decisions in mission selection and during the missions, making choices more deliberate and impactful, avoiding all the bullshit with quest triggers. And most importantly, it makes the world feel more real by not being as reliant on the main character. If you don't accept certain missions, someone else will, making it feel like you're not the only sentient being in this world around whom everything else revolves. You don't see any character face to face. Your interactions are limited to voice messages as you embark on a new mission, return from one, or fight alongside or against someone in battle. And yet, the more you play through the game and the more characters you listen to, the more they grow on you. Because as simple as they are, they make enough sense to feel like actual characters. Armored Core 6 doesn't try to be cryptic, and the information it provides is enough to work as a foundation from which your imagination can take off and fill in the gaps. But it doesn't just do that. It also rewards your interest and investment of your time and imagination with it, making it all the more worthwhile. If I had to sum up Elden Ring with just one word, it would be dog. For how dogshit the game is, no, it would be scale. Not only for how massive the game is, but also for how the scale is used throughout the experience to wow the player. As for Armored Core 6, the word that would describe it perfectly is spectacle. The bosses in this game are top-notch, both in terms of complex yet surprisingly fair gameplay, but also in terms of superb presentation. Visually, they look like insurmountable obstacles, and music doesn't fail to set the corresponding mood. It's at its best when it adapts dynamically to what is happening on the screen, seemingly getting in sync with explosions or getting quieter before a strong shot or changing up on a boss phase transition. I wish it would happen more often than it does, as the results speak for themselves.
All or nothing.
It gives me goosebumps, and this quality of presentation remains high throughout the game. What can be better than, after hyping up a battle in your mind, for it to surpass your wildest expectations in terms of how epic it looks and sounds? I guess it would be if it also played the part. The first half of the game is very challenging. I spent more time than I'd like to admit struggling with the tutorial boss. I'm not a fan of this encounter because the boss tends to get out of bounds where you cannot really follow him, which feels somewhat cheap. The game also doesn't do a great job of teaching you to use the assault boost in offense, and the sheer importance of staggering an enemy and capitalizing on that. But if you beat this boss, you must have figured those things out. The subsequent levels feel easy after learning those lessons, and while people criticize them for being too simple or short, it kind of makes sense contextually. Not every job you take has to have a boss fight at the end, and it only feels more realistic if it doesn't. The last mission in the chapter doesn't play out as expected and turns into something more challenging. The element of surprise wouldn't be there if that was the structure for most of the missions. And so, while Chapter 1 might feel somewhat slow as a result, I don't have an issue with it personally. Because while the surprise of an upcoming battle is spoiled by an option to resupply just before reaching the main objective, the fight itself might still surprise you by how difficult it is. Altea's fight was very tough. It took me over an hour to finally take out half of its health bar, and then the fight got even harder, switching to phase 2 with a lot more aggressive moveset. It felt like careful play was discouraged in a sense. Enemy takes almost no damage with its shield up, and once you break through it, you have limited time before it will be up again. So you are incentivized to be very aggressive, and that early in the game that often leads to mistakes, being staggered, and having your health erased before your eyes. Eventually, I decided to change my weapon loadout to be more suitable for dealing with the shield. And that made the fight a lot more manageable. And after a few more attempts, I finally beat Altea's. For me, it was up there with some of the most challenging boss fights in FromSoft games. But I very much enjoyed the challenge, as I like the feeling of triumph from overcoming difficulties. The problem for me was that this difficulty didn't last, and that's not because the game gets easier, but because the player gets much stronger. This might sound strange, as, contrary to Souls titles, there are no level ups or weapon upgrades in this game. With the exception of some minor buffs through OS upgrades, the main progression is happening through the player getting better, as well as unlocking more customization options, some of which are just too overpowered. And the game encourages you to use them. The tutorial boss, as well as subsequent encounters, show the importance of staying close to an enemy, dealing a lot of impact damage for a stun, and having a lot of burst damage to capitalize on the vulnerability. Let's see, what would fit this description? Shotgun's perfect. While we're at it, why not take 2, effectively doubling our damage? We can always keep a melee weapon on the shoulder slot after all, in case we need it, but that's optional. We can just take the stun needles instead. The game forces everyone to use it for one of the missions, so surely it cannot be broken, right? It is a nice feeling to become overpowered in games, but it only works this way if it feels like you deserve it. You have to carefully plan your build so that all the pieces synergize well together, find all the necessary parts, and work for that power fantasy so that then, against all odds, you actually become stronger than the game expects you to. But leading players into builds that cut through bosses like butter before even completing half of the game is just too much. And no, it's not the intended experience, because bosses don't even have enough time to finish their first lines of dialogue during the fight, because I kill them before they're done speaking. It's ridiculous. And no, I'm not saying that I'm a pro gamer, look at how fast I destroyed those bosses. You might be saying that, and thanks for noticing, but in all honesty, certain builds turn PvE into a breeze, making the game feel less rewarding as a result. It still is a spectacle, there's still great music in there, and I love those characters, but goddamn, does it really lessen the impact of the finale when those bosses die on the first try without much effort. It's almost as if I'm playing Dark Souls with a magic build and enemies just don't know how to react to it properly. But while in Dark Souls that was a completely different class with its own requirements, where most people play in melee characters for the first time, in Armored Core there are no classes, nor requirements in terms of level, upgrades, stats, or anything. You just swap in the new weapons or some other parts and try it out, and oh no, now you're overpowered. And sure, I could have just swapped out and used less powerful weapons, But this game made it clear how difficult it can be in the first chapters. It showed me that I really need to adapt to overcome. And not knowing what is yet ahead of me, it's not my fault that I will instinctively chase power. It is the developer's job and not mine to balance the game, at the very least, for the first playthrough. Games are problems, not because they're problematic, but because that's what they are behind the scenes. Be it a puzzle, an optimization problem, a mystery, or whatever else. It is a problem that a player is tasked to solve in the best possible way, and we get pleasure from doing it. It's like finally completing that chore on the to-do list. It feels good, even if actually doing it wasn't all that great. The difference with games is that they try to make the process enjoyable as well, but the matter of fact remains that if the problem is too easy, then the reward we feel from solving it is diminished as well. And as I said, it's not my job to make sure it doesn't happen. It's not me who designed this game or its problems. I'm not going to make my to-do list more difficult just to feel more accomplished by the end of the day. I'm not going to try mopping the floor with nothing but my bare hands just to feel more proud of myself. That would be ridiculous, right? If I enjoy the process of an activity, then on subsequent times I do it, I might choose to make some limitations for myself to offset my knowledge and experience with it, to keep things challenging. Not sure about the mopping analogy, but for games it could be completing them without leveling or without taking any damage, by only using certain items or whatever else you might think of. But at the very least, the game has to provide a balanced experience for the first playthrough for me to even want to go through it more than once. The thing is, there is a very simple fix for this problem: balancing. Make stagger less important in this game. Nerf those shotguns and Gatling guns and a bunch of other weapons. They try to balance it with several patches, but I don't think it's enough yet. And I will play this game more. I will try many more weapons and loadouts, and I will certainly find more fun ways to play, but it has already damaged my first playthrough, and it has already damaged my first impressions of some bosses, and it has cheapened the impact of all those spectacular moments I've had. And that's a shame. It's not all bad though, and one other thing that helps elevate Armored Core 6 is its endgame. Getting all achievements felt more pleasant than 100%ing any other FromSoft game for me. Admittedly, the bar was low, but still. You need to beat the game 3 times to get everything, but since the New Game Plus cycles add new missions and change up some of the existing ones, playing through them still feels fresh. The endings are interesting and distinct enough to feel meaningful, unlike the different color filters you get in Elden Ring. And there is no painful grind for rare weapons or Covenant items like Dark Souls. You still need to find some of the mech parts during the missions, and I wish there was tracking for them, just like for battle logs, but it's not a big deal. Arguably, the main endgame activity, apart from the PvP, is getting S ranks on all of the missions. And sadly, the issue with balance is present here as well. The main problem is that the requirements for the S ranks are not only obscure, but also change from mission to mission. I wish the game was more upfront about what you have to do in each case. But overall, the endgame content is really solid. Usually, after 100%ing a game, I kind of get fed up with it and need a bit of time before my interest in it reignites. But that wasn't the case with Armored Core. And frankly speaking, this is the only FromSoft game that I wanted to keep on playing right after getting all of the achievements in it. And I think it's an achievement in its own right. Armored Core 6 is a niche game, but that doesn't mean you have to be a fan of the series or an enjoyer of the mecha genre to fully appreciate it. I'm neither of those, as we've established, and yet the game resonated with me. It's full of spectacle and grandiose moments, but at the same time doesn't pretend to be deeper than it actually is. In some ways, I enjoyed it more than other FromSoft titles, though I'd need to give it more time before settling on a definitive placement with respect to those games. Hopefully there will be more updates and patches that will address the remaining issues with balancing, and some more features like co-op play would be welcome, but I think I'm getting ahead of myself here. Even in its current state, despite its flaws, Armored Core 6 was a surprisingly pleasant and memorable experience for me, and I hope it might be for you as well. Thanks for watching.
Got a job for you, 61. Subscribe.